From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where you can't spell bastard without T-A-R-D. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. Glad to have you with us tonight. And we open with a special programming note. The Golden Age of Western Civilization News Roundup will be once again preempted this week so that we can bring you this special edition of the Worst People in the Whole Wide World Weekly Update. And speaking of being preempted, we open with the case of James Christian Kimmel, age 57, of Malibu, California, by way of New York, New York. If you've never heard of Mr. Kimmel, and you didn't know before this week that he hosts an alleged comedy show called Jimmy Kimmel Live on the ABC television network, a subsidiary of the Disney grooming syndicate, well, that's because, like nearly all of the other people in North America, you don't watch Jimmy Kimmel Live. How do we know nearly everyone in North America doesn't watch Jimmy Kimmel Live? Well, because it's been averaging a 0.16 nightly rating over the course of the last calendar year, which, for those fans keeping score at home, is an even more dismal number than the 0.18 that the Late Show starring Steve Colbert has been averaging in the same time period. And to put matters in perspective, the Steve Colbert Show already got itself canceled a couple months ago for having ratings that are so far down the shitter they don't even begin to offset the 8-figure salary of the host and the 7-figure salaries of the room full of alleged comedy writers it apparently takes to come up with the tiresome third-rate codswallop that he vomits out each night during his opening monologue. So, to sum it up a different way, you might say Mr. Kimmel was already walking a bit of a thinner line than he seemed to realize. You might say Mr. Kimmel's employers and a good many of ABC's local affiliates were already on the lookout for a good excuse to make his show go away, which he very conveniently provided for them on Monday night this week when he opened his alleged comedy monologue by brazenly insinuating that Charlie Kirk's alleged assassin, the militant homosexual who cohabitates with his trans furry lover and writes Antifa slogans all over his shell casings, is actually a conservative Republican and a card-carrying member of something that he, Mr. Kimmel, refers to as the MAGA Gang, which evidently is some sort of successor organization to the Gas House Gang, the Purple Gang, the Over the Hill Gang, the Gridiron Gang, the Apple Dumpling Gang, the Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, the Doberman Gang, the T-Bird Gang, the Dirt Gang, and in fact, the Bikini Chain Gang. But wait, cry Mr. Kimmel's defenders, and let's just call them the Jimmy Gang since we can play this game too. According to the Jimmy Gang, their man, Mr. Kimmel, wasn't actually being serious when he said all that stuff. He was just doing a satirical setup line for the next joke in his act. To which a normal person with a functioning soul might say, "You're actually serious right now? That's your explanation? That he was making a joke about a man being murdered in broad daylight in the presence of his wife and his young children? That's supposed to make it all okay? That's what you came up with." And yes, the galaxy brain intellectual masterminds who came up with this explanation are, nearly all of them, Democrat elected officials and alleged journalists for various fake news media sludge factories, all of whom, it should be said, are orders of magnitude more upset about Jimmy Kimmel being pulled off the air than they ever were about Charlie Kirk being fatally shot by a trans furry-loving homosexual for the dastardly crime of attempting to have a civil dialogue with some college students. CNN's Jake Tapper, noted paragon of hard-hitting journalistic rigor, ran straight to Steve Colbert's big, comfy couch, because of course he did, to whine that, well, if you can't criticize our leaders, then we're not the USA anymore. Democrat members of Congress, including noted incest practitioner Ilhan Omar of Minnesota and noted Chinese spy copulator Eric Swalwell of California, who can't go on CNN anymore because his big juicy farts are just too darn loud, ran straight to their favorite America-hating, violence-promoting leftist podcasts to declare that Trump is an authoritarian fascist, which is the same thing they were saying last week, and the week before that, and the week before that. If one didn't know better, one might suspect they were human versions of a magic 8-ball, where you give them a good hard shake and they say one of 5 things, and Trump is an authoritarian fascist is 3 of them. The other 2 being, you're a racist, and please send me money to help save our democracy, or something. And speaking of America-hating, violence-promoting leftist podcasters, they have also been doing the type of yeoman's work these past 10 days that befits a well-earned entry in the Worst People in the Whole Wide World Weekly Update. Or, if you prefer the shorthand acronym, the WPWWWWU, which, in our own defense, is still less awkward and unwieldy than saying LGBTQIA EIEIO 2S plus hashtag asterisk ampersand divided by sign and whatever the hell else they have added this month to cover all of the newly invented sex perversions being dreamed up at your local state university for the low price of $80,000 per year per student, each of whom will graduate not knowing how to read or do basic arithmetic. I'm thinking specifically of execrable, cretinous douchebags like Stephen Bonnell, stage name Destiny, and Hasan Piker, nephew of the similarly cretinous, America-hating, violence-promoting leftist podcaster, Cenk Uygur. Is it Uyghur or Iger? Have we ever had a final ruling on how to pronounce that big sweaty asshole's name? The reason I ask is because I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, because I know that would cause him to go into a frothing, apoplectic rage and loudly scream abusive profanities at anyone in his general vicinity, which, to be fair, is the same way he reacts to most things. Now, if you've had any sort of passing familiarity with the America-hating leftist YouTube ecosphere over the course of the last 5 or 10 years, you already know that these room temperature IQ neo-Marxist dipshits are some of the most widely followed live streamers in that particular cosplay revolutionary fever swamp corner of the internet. I won't call them content creators, because turning on a camera and a microphone and whining for a couple of hours about how you want all Republicans to be violently killed while gullible, low-information adolescents fall all over each other sending you their parents' money is not something I'm willing to call content creation. But this was the week that the normies out in flyover country, people in the real world with real lives, I believe they're called, first started being aware of their antics. And the normies are not much pleased. Much like the owners of the Disney ABC grooming syndicate, the owners of the various video sharing platforms are now being bombarded from all corners with some very inconvenient questions that they would rather not be asked. Questions like, why is this person with this huge following allowed to openly advocate for political violence and murder on your platform, and then to celebrate it when it happens, totally without sanction on your part? Isn't advocating and celebrating murder rather wildly contrary to your site's terms of service? Do you choose to look the other way simply because their targets happen to be Donald Trump and people who support Donald Trump? Would you allow that sort of behavior or anything remotely resembling it from any non-leftist streamer? Did you take a similarly hands-off approach 4 and 5 years ago with people who raised objections to the government's public health policies? Or did you banhammer them without a moment's hesitation? Well, it turns out those owners are going to have the opportunity to answer those very same questions and then some 2 weeks from tomorrow on the 8th of October, when they are hauled before the House Oversight Committee to explain themselves. And I trust you don't need this reporter to tell you that when social media executives are hauled before House Oversight, it never goes very well for the social media executives, notwithstanding the best efforts of the Democrats on said committee to run interference on their behalf. And you know, here at the offices of the WPWWWU, we would be remiss in our stated duties if we didn't give a special shout out to the current governor of California, a greasy, slimy, gravel-throated creature by the name of Gavin Christopher Newsom, who decided this weekend, of all weekends, would be a splendid time to issue thinly veiled threats in the direction of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, which he did yesterday when his social media accounts blasted out the ominous-sounding message, quote, Kristi Noem is going to have a bad day, end quote. A message that is strikingly similar, both in tone and in substance, to a series of messages posted by the associates of Charlie Kirk's alleged assassin in the days leading up to his murder, when they said things like, Charlie Kirk is going to have a bad day on September 10th. Is there even the slightest possibility that the governor of the nation's most populous state, a sophisticated political operator like Gavin Newsom, didn't know that echoing those messages was exactly what he was doing? No, there is not. So we now live in a world, and what a joyous world it is, where governors issue terrorist threats towards sitting members of the president's cabinet, because Mr. Newsom thinks it is offensive that Mrs. Noem plans on apprehending criminals in the state of California, which is, after all, her job, and he wants to frighten her away from doing that. If there is anything we know about Gavin Newsom, we know that he wants very, very badly to be the next president of the United States. How does he imagine that issuing terrorist threats to presidential cabinet secretaries gets him closer to that goal? Well, I can't say. But I am sure the Secret Service will ask him that very question during his interview tomorrow, as the U.S. Attorney for the Central District of California has referred the matter for investigation, as well he ought to have done. And I want to close this edition of the WPWWWWU by giving a special shout out to the members of the Antifa, Trantifa, BLM rage mob who have been issuing threats against the venue at which Charlie Kirk's memorial service took place this afternoon, who have been attempting these past few days to infiltrate the venue while wearing stolen law enforcement uniforms, and who have been staging angry protests outside of the stadium. Because losing all capacity for self-awareness can be a hell of a thing. I'm sure some of the kids doing the threatening and the infiltrating and the protesting are too young to remember the events of 15 or 20 years ago, so the duty falls to this reporter to offer them this little pearl of perspective and wisdom. You know what we used to call people who protested funerals? We called them the Westboro Baptist Church. And every single person in the country of every political stripe and persuasion and every religious affiliation or lack thereof agreed that they were a bunch of morally reprehensible asshole savages. I am done. That's all I've got. This has been the Worst People in the Whole Wide World Weekly Update. I now transmit you into the loving care of my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.